Good evening. Welcome to DiversiTV Season 3. If you are just tuning in, welcome. If you are one of our growing legion of regular viewers, welcome back. My name is Mark Harris, and my guest tonight is Quentin Reynolds, and we'll be talking about, in the waning days of Black History Month, giving Black History Month a local spin. So welcome, Quentin.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, these are interesting times, like the Chinese curse proverb or whatever, right? You know,
Yes.
So who would have thought that, you know, with the whole Obama-Hillary thing, that, you know, we'd be having, you know, this kind of political situation, and looking at some of the things that have been going on here historically in this state. Because one of the things that I like to observe is that in terms of looking at conditions in America, outside of Native American folks, African Americans are like the canary in the coal mine. Because we will often be some of the people who are most visibly discriminated against in terms of looking at numbers. So.
Right.
Certainly here at Lane, one of the things that, you know, we had talked about is, you know, in 1999, for example, for the first time in Lane's history, there were actually 12 Black people working on main campus, which, you know, in Lane's entire history, had been like less than one per year hired for the entire history, right?
Wow.
So. One of the things that we look at in terms of Eugene, and I had just gotten some statistics that kind of bear this out in a very stark way, being part of a state that essentially was created to exclude Black people.
Right.
For example, Representative Thurston, who, you know, the area in Springfield is named after, Samuel Thurston. He was a legislator in the Oregon Territory, and his idea was that because African Americans were so familiar with Europeans and European culture that they could give a tactical advantage to Native Americans and encourage Native Americans to revolt. Therefore, to prevent that, African Americans should be banned from the state.
Right.
Entirely, both free and slave.
Wow.
Right? And so,
Yes.
which, you know, and so there were never more than, say, 200 people at the time of the exclusion laws, 200 Black people in the entire state, you know, and we'll see those numbers. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, this is one of our visual aids that we'll be showing. So let's go to slide and talk about DiversiTV's mission. So it's to illuminate everyday diversity issues as we define them at LCC, which is beyond. What happened? Oh, I know what happened. PowerPoint just decided to quit. That's okay. We'll get it back. To illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't necessarily get it. All the time. Right. So one of the, as soon as we get PowerPoint back, so we're going to ad-lib. This is live television.
Great.
Tell me, were you born here?
I was born in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay.
And my mother, she gives us the story, and I was the fifth. So my mother had 4 miscarriages, and I was number 5. And I was the one that survives, and so it's a humbling experience to live here, to grow up here, and to be a part of our community, our culture, the history, and it's been a pretty good ride overall.
What was it like growing up here?
Growing up as a young man, the things that I remember is being around my uncles and being around my grandmother and grandfather. And at that time, we didn't know that we were different. And so there was a lot of love. There was always trust. We'd be disciplined. And we spent a lot of time together. And so it was fun as we growing up here, especially going to the schools because we moved from Eugene. after a couple of years being in elementary, went to Springfield Middle School, well, actually Maple Elementary down the street, that we found out that we were different. We thought that we were the same, but kids,
i.e.
Americans at that time, they told us that we were different. And we found out that we were different, especially me being the oldest, when it came to sports, when it came to having interaction with the opposite sex, their peers, their friends, and they would tell me that it wasn't okay. Even the parents would tell me that it was okay to be friends, but no more than friends. And so it gave me realization that I was different, and it hurt.
Yeah.
It hurt.
Talk about the sports angle, because there were, what do you mean, getting picked last for games? What?
Growing up, I wasn't one of the best athletes starting out. I had to work for everything that I've gotten up to this time. So running track, I was a natural. I did well. And they would always put me against the fastest kid in the elementary school. And in my heart, part of it was to stay even with the kid, but not to beat my counterparts, because I was concerned that there would be some opposition or some trouble if I would come in first.
Right.
Playing basketball, the same thing.
I mean, you're kind of tall in the saddle there. I mean, hoops would be natural, right? Yeah.
Right. I love to run. We learned how to run. My Uncle Claude, he would teach us how to run. He taught us how to play sports when we were real young. My father helped us to learn as well, but he would teach us some of the fundamentals that we needed. So he showed me how to run, and I loved it. It was perfect for me. And that generated for me, as I grew, it helped condition me for basketball. And with basketball, I was one of the last to be picked. Didn't have the greatest talent, but I had some great work ethics. And some of my peers, some of the players that I would play with, harsh. Never played with an Afro-American. I was the black kid. I was called, and I don't know if you can say this on...
You can, it's cable.
Okay, I was called the nigger, and I was not treated like everybody else, especially if I became a little better. And it hurt because I knew that I was isolated, and you could feel it from some of the coaching in my younger years. And it wasn't until I got to the 5th grade that a teacher by the name of Mr. Ford at Maple Elementary started helping me to gain my identity and helping me to feel as if I was somebody. And that's when I began to trust a little more those who had authority over us, especially in the teaching field.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because sometimes, I mean, there's stories told, with your family, I mean, and others, a lot of hostility. I mean, you talked about this at an earlier gathering we had, with the city for city employees about, I mean, you didn't really allude to your track skills at that particular thing, but you did talk about having to run from south. Was it?
Well, what happened is that the stories from South are Eugene High School. That was the story my father would allude, and he would tell us. Very big, startling man, and there were days that he would run from South, well, now called South Eugene High School back then. He would run from there until he got to the friendly streets out West 11th, where his older brother, Sam Reynolds, and some of his friends, he could see them.
Sam Reynolds Jr.
Sam Reynolds Jr., who's now deceased, and he could see them in a distance, and they were his protectors. It was like his safe haven when he got to a certain point out on West 11th.
Right, like Bertelsen?
Yes.
So like, i.e., what
Sam
later be
Reynolds.
called Sam R. Street?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
The so-called Negro Settlement.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
we'll get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about running...
The friendly streets, you say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was
okay, so that's out of the city limits,
It
actually,
was
at the time.
about a mile, I guess, a little more than a mile outside the city limits. And it was a tough environment. I remember there were some days where we grew up out there. Not a lot of time, but on the Stubbs side, I remember them having a house out there and just having the out toilet and just having a door that you could see through and the pot belly stove. And I remember all the kids, my uncles and aunts and us living in there for a short period of time. And my grandmother, my grandfather would raise their own food, their pigs and rabbits and their chickens. And even though sometimes it felt like there wasn't enough, there was enough to go around. And more than that, there was love. And so we really didn't know any difference at that time in our life. And it was a good time. I just wish that my family, especially my siblings, that we can remember that, because that's what brought us through. It was the love and the caring and the devotion for one another.
There, I remember seeing over the weekend, C-SPAN, there was this State of the Black Union, right? Where a number of African American intelligentsia, Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, Jesse Jackson, Dick Gregory, all kinds of folks, basically talking about, look, we're used to suffering. So if with the whole thing with Obama, because everybody, all of us in the back of our mind are thinking, they're going to kill him.
Right.
They're going to kill him, right? No, however popular they're going to get, and so, well, what if he gets in? Or what if he loses? Or what if he does get killed? Well, we still have the same agenda as what they were saying. And, we're used to suffering, so we're going to go through it no matter what.
Exactly.
Let's go to slide now that PowerPoint decided to get back. Go to slide if you would. All right. So this is census data. I don't know if you can see this, but one of the things I wanted to point out, this is the African American population in Eugene from 1850 to the year 2000 according to U.S. Census data.
Wow.
All right? Now, you have to understand, okay, it was illegal for black people to be in the state.
Wow. Completely
illegal. Right? You were supposed, some people could get deported, and according to the historical record, one Jacob Vanderpool, a free black businessman in Salem who owned a saloon, hotel, et cetera, got deported, according to the law. But in 1850, there was one African American in the Eugene incorporated area. 1860, not recorded, quote, free colored listed. Now, here it becomes interesting because in 1865, the Morning Register, which was later became the Register Guard when it got bought by the Daily Guard, which was owned by Klansmen. Anyway, we'll get into that a little later. But they recorded that there were several black people living in town at the time, and they asked them their opinion about the Emancipation Proclamation and the fact that they were free. Now, they didn't name them when they were, of course, generally favorable. But here we have this listing in the census, free colored. They're not counted. They're mentioned in the newspaper. They're not mentioned by name.
Wow.
So the first historical African American we get is Wiley Griffin in late 1800s, and he died in 1913. Then 1870, not recorded, colored, listed. So from 1850 to 1950, there are, according to the U.S. Census, 50 African Americans in a 100-year period.
Wow.
And then with the coming of what we refer to as locally the black pioneers, which includes your family, it's not like they came in on wagon trains or something, because that whole reference to the Negro Settlement, out West 11th, like, wait a minute, what is this? They didn't come in on a wagon train and just settle here. They were forced to move, right? So we look at, in terms of housing discrimination, where you start looking in the 1950s, black-owned homes, white-owned homes, black-owned homes 4, white-owned homes 6,021, black renters 6, and white renters 5,000. So the numbers are kept artificially low, and then you see the numbers slowly growing over the years to the most recent census done in 2000, 550 black-owned homes, close to 70,000 white-owned homes, and black renters close to 1,000, and white renters close to 50,000, 48. So the disparity there is interesting, shall we say. So when we talk about the historical, actual pioneers, Marcus Lopez, York, who was Lewis and Clark's slave, Moses Harris, who was a trapper and wagon train scout, passed through this area. And then the first historical African American that appears in the Eugene scene, Wiley Griffin, who was what's referred to as a tram operator. Basically, this is the first transit system, eventually became LTD. These are the tracks basically that run down West 11th, and he had a house in what is now eWeb's employee parking lot on the Mill Race. Wow. Again, it was illegal for him to live there, let alone own property, but there he was, and this is a fairly public position. So through the Historical Society, among others, we have this picture of a black musician, unnamed, right? They just say, well, he's just passing through. This is staff at the Smead Hotel on Willamette Street. You see, here's a brother sitting in the front row, again, unnamed, right? I mean, it is Black history. We're not really talking, but you can't really talk about Black history in Oregon or Eugene without talking about the Ku Klux Klan, because the Klan, and their prominence in, the Ku Klux Klan was run out of the University of Oregon, county commissioners, a chamber of commerce, doctors, lawyers, prominent businessmen, et cetera, who, certainly, even though the historical record, as exemplified by the Register Guard, says that the Klan disappeared soon after this next picture, which is at the fairgrounds.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
With cross burnings and parade, cross burnings on Skinner's Butte, fireworks parade down Willamette Street, et cetera, with a rally and cross burning at the fairgrounds. This is in 1924, right? And according to the Register Guard, which then was owned by a Klansman, the Klan disappeared. Well, we found that to be shall we say, a lie. And that Klan have been reported to be meeting in town into the 1970s. And, I actually have a tag from, a local duck blind at Stewart Pond with KKK. So, somebody sympathetic to the Klan is, tagging as recently as 2004.
Wow.
So we come to what is referred to either Tent City, Ferry Street, the community, right? So from the late 1800s until around 1949 when it was bulldozed, it was a transient camp, but it was outside the city limits of the city proper. And so people like your grandfather, who had money, had the ability to buy property, but were denied that legally. It was completely legal to discriminate. Basically lived out in this community, which one had been a transient camp, but we can't say that it was exclusively African American because we have this picture here from the Historical Society where we have clearly a mixed race group. I'm not sure if we can identify who those kids are, the black kids on the right, but clearly, these are residents according to, the information that came with this picture. Largely African American, though it was clearly mixed race, and with the exception of, for example, this water pump, and it's not clear where this is. There's no electricity, no sewer, et cetera, and people are, the name Tent City seems to be more of a misnomer because they actually did have wooden frame houses with, in some cases, army tents, like in the case of the Ferry Street Chapel, which is now St. Mark's Church, right? So there is a wooden frame there with 40, I think, by 20 army tent, because the local BSU at Lane Community College actually bought one to have what we call the Tent City reenactment. So what we're trying to do is have a Black History exhibit, every year. We haven't done it for a couple of years, and you still actually have the tent somewhere, but... So we look at land covenants, basically establishing what's referred to as redlining. And the black line basically reads, no person other than those of the Caucasian race shall own, use, lease, or occupy any portion of the said premises, providing that this restriction shall not provide occupancy by servants of a different race employed by an owner or tenant. So in other words, essentially this is basically legal discrimination. In fact, the real estate agents could in fact lose their license for selling to a person of color. So these land covenants essentially said it was legal to discriminate until the federal laws made it illegal in 1965, which didn't end discrimination, but just it did end it legally, right? So when we talk about the so-called Negro Settlement, and we'll basically be coming up to pictures shortly, since no housing could be found within the city limits and Tent City got bulldozed to upgrade the Ferry Street Bridge, no one could, except for a few people like the Mims, who basically were able to get a house surreptitiously, even though people picketed their house and signed petitions to get them out, but they were there legally. So West 11th, as you pointed out, was outside of the city limits, right. The West 11th so-called settlement. So this is from the Oregonian, and it's referring to, the caption says, Eugene faces problem of decent housing for colored families, persecution threat evaporates. So the persecution threat they're talking about is what used to be Flicks and Picks. The house doesn't exist anymore. A black family moved in there and had a cross burned on their lawn. Oh. Right? And up here, in the upper right-hand corner of this caption from the Oregonian, basically is the Amazon Creek. So Tuesday Forum, big event for local Negro families. And, talking with your Aunt Lily, right, showing her this article. Here's a picture of your grandfather smoking a cigar, right, reading about Abe Lincoln. And apparently this was staged. So, and then we have, the young Lily as a child there, right? The forum was basically timed for Lincoln's birthday, which then was a separate holiday, right? Because Lincoln freed the slaves, and this was basically about the fact that there's no decent housing for black people within the city limits. They can't buy homes. What are we going to do? Here they are living, in essentially, this settlement, so to speak, as if they were refugees or something like that. So the reporter staged your grandfather's dialogue by saying, regarding Abe Lincoln, he said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Abe was quite a man." Like, okay, this is a faux Southern accent. This is like in the text.
Wow.
Okay? And Lily basically reported that Sam only read, to the family from the Bible, never ever referred to Lincoln in his life. So this is, in fact, fabricated, the dialogue. And so we can see this pattern with actually reporting on African American or people of color issues with the paper since then, somewhat. So this picture, racial problem strikes Eugene. So basically, it's your dad and
my mother. Wow.
Well, I think it's actually don't you have an aunt named Lois?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I think that's who this is. So brother and sister, right?
Okay.
So they're carrying water in a milk can drawn from a gas station in town, okay? In town, because they're living outside of the city limits, and they're having to carry, this is the family's drinking, cooking, and bathing supply. Wow. And they're basically carrying this every day, right? And putting it, I guess, in a larger container, and because there's no water out there, no sewer, because you got outhouses, as you reported. Garden, pigs, chickens, et cetera, and this is the area that becomes eventually, quote unquote, Sam R. Street, where the Ferry Street, where St. Mark's Church is today. And this is a close-up of basically the mighty Amazon and the fact that it isn't paved and it's mud and it rains and all that kind of stuff. So, having to run, being chased, out to where it's safe, right, is an indication of sort of the racial climate, shall we say.
Exactly.
I'd heard this story about a house that you'd moved in Springfield in which some people decorated a tree.
Wow. Well, I'm not certain about the tree, but I do remember as growing up, and this is something that happened when we were fairly new.
Yeah.
And Mom, if you're listening, please call. I remember my mom worked on the west side of town
Yeah.
for the railroad.
Yeah.
And me being the oldest, and there was 9 of us all together, there was a night where she went to work. And it might have been an hour or 2 later, beaming lights coming through the front window, letting know these are single pane windows.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see the lights, and I'm peeking out the curtains, and there are several cars full of people sitting there, flashing their lights. And I remember feeling alone,
Yeah.
no help.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my mother and telling her, Mom, there are people sitting out here in our driveway. Literally, there must have been about 6 or 7 cars, maybe more. Had a pretty nice driveway, but it was full with people in them. And I remember her telling us to call the police. And I can't remember if she came home at that time or she may have came home a little later, but we called the police, and it took them some time to get there. And that was one of my toughest experience from the standpoint that moving to Springfield was not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And that was my first major encounter with adults. I thought it was only on a kid level, that kids were only going to be cruel.
Kids were being prejudiced.
Right, kids
Yeah.
being prejudiced,
Right.
but then it came to a point where the adults started taking part.
Yeah.
And that was my first experience, noticing that this is bigger than just me being a kid.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess as a kid, you wouldn't necessarily have the analysis of, okay, here we are in one place,
Right.
and here we're moved to another place, they're being hostile, they may be burning crosses, people may be hung in effigy,
Right.
Little
Right.
representations of the family hung in, that's the tree thing that I heard,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So it's like,
So-
whoa, not exactly a warm welcome and openly hostile here, right?
Exactly.
Your aunt talked about, your Aunt Lily talked about there were, restaurants downtown where they would basically say, no colored allowed, the
Exactly.
whole, actually with signs, the Newberries and the Woolworths,
Right.
Woolworths, which is a hole on Willamette, and the Newberries, which is now the Dax, child care, basically the whole Southern lunch counter thing.
Right.
Y'all couldn't go in there. You couldn't, if you want to put on clothes, you couldn't, they wouldn't let you try on clothes. You had to buy them without putting, all kinds of different things.
Exactly.
65, they bring in the sheriff from Selma to tell the real story about what happened with the march in Selma. It's like, okay, this, has this history where, there's
Right.
open discrimination. So, to say that Oregon is a southern state in the Northwest and that Eugene was definitely a southern town, which means with a Klan and, discrimination, then quickly engenders the response,
Right.
that we would normally do is like, we're not necessarily going to take this lying down. So there's going to be a civil rights movement, which your grandmother figured in prominently as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
And yes, I do hope she calls in, but we can still
Right.
talk story because this is not the only time that this conversation is going to happen. And I hope this
Exactly.
begins to open up some things. So you're in business.
Yes.
What's that like? And tell us what you do. And
Okay. Well, I work for State Farm, and I'm an insurance agent. I've been doing it about 7 years. Been with State Farm 20 years. So I moved from Salem. I started out in Salem, Oregon, as an underwriter, and moved up to DuPont, Washington, where our new office is located. And we moved back to Eugene about 1995 to start the independent agency.
Okay.
At first, I moved back because I was comfortable. I grew up here. I lived here. Some people told me, don't move back. to your home.
Why?
Well, because they felt it wasn't enough diversity. Going to run into some...
I should think not.
Well, yes. Going to run into some rough, hard knocks,
Yes.
some tough roads, and there has been some struggles. Yes, there's a lot of good people here, but I do run into the struggles, and sometimes it is a little tough. And some people may say, well, it might be because you're not working the business the way that you need to work it. And you hear that.
What would that mean?
Well,
I mean, you're trained, and
right.
they give you training. I mean, they don't want an office to fail. It looks bad for them.
Exactly. And State Farm is not in the business to ever see us fail. And that's not what I was just saying, but just talking to some, that there's some other types of avenues that you might be able to do. And what I find out in some cases, not in all avenues, that it doesn't work the same way for minorities as it would for another race of people. And I'm not saying that that's the way that it is with State Farm, but in reality, when you're talking to your clients or you're talking to potential clients, some of that comes through. And I don't think it really comes through from the standpoint where they're trying to hurt, but it's a realization as to, you know, this is how some things are. And you hear those stories, and I try not to pick those up because I know that what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing right now here. And I believe that I'm back in Eugene for a reason. And so what I look as the process for me, because it's a journey.
Yeah.
I feel that this is the stop that I have to make right now in life. I don't understand everything about it, but this is my opportunity. There's something I must learn, and there's something I must accomplish before, you know, you either move on, or maybe this is going to be where we're going to be for the rest of our lives. So there's some processing there, and again, just to let you know, I'm comfortable right now with a lot of things. I'm not saying that I'm at peace with everything, you know, as far as being back, but I'm comfortable. My kids are here, and their struggles turn into my struggles.
Yes.
My wife's struggles turn into my struggles. So sometimes I take on more just because I know what it's like to grow up here, and I wish I could do more, but there's parts in their lives that they're going to have to go through that journey themselves, and they're going to have to experience it. Not that I want them to, but it'll make them better in the long run. And I think it's going to make them healthier adults, because it's not easy. And we talk about those things. And sometimes, you know, my oldest son asks, hey, why did we move back? Why are we here? Should have stayed where we're at. And, you know, sometimes you second guess yourself.
Yeah.
But I just believe that, you know, it was an opportunity, and it's a good opportunity for the most part. But then you kind of sometimes second guess yourself and saying, hey, maybe a bigger city, a more diverse climate would be the better opportunity. But right now, I know in my life that this is the opportunity that was given to me, and I'm back in Eugene, back in Oregon for a reason. So I want to, as I'm going, instead of being bitter, I want to learn what I need to learn. And I want to do it better, because there was a time in my life that, I'll be honest, I was bitter. And
Sure.
I was so
With
bitter.
good reason.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some of the things that you talked about at, you know, that city event, you know, back in April and March, it's like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you be more bitter? And, what, you know, there are a lot of people that, you know, given the same circumstances, would be as well. But again, you know, you can't necessarily let that consume you. Not
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Allow that to consume me for a few years, and I find time passing if you allow it. And all it does, it brings back what I didn't like about Eugene when I left the first time, meaning when I worked for State Farm in Salem. Then we moved to Washington. And
where in Washington?
we lived in Olympia, but the
Olympia,
office
okay.
was in DuPont, so
Okay.
we were about 15 minutes south of Tacoma. And I liked it because it was more of a melting pot. The only thing I had to get used to is that the diversity, because I didn't grow up with it. It was a new situation, a new journey for me. I had to relearn some things. And it's not because
Can you talk about that a little?
Okay. When you get to the bigger cities, and I'll just speak for myself,
Yeah.
Around more Afro-Americans and Asians and Hispanics, and I didn't see that growing up a lot.
Intact communities of color.
Exactly.
Intact geographical communities of color.
Exactly. So wherever I went, I experienced more of Afro-Americans and Asians and Hispanics. And at the beginning, a part of it, a little intimidating. And it wasn't because it was designed for that, but the community that I grew up in, I didn't experience that other than through family.
Right.
And through church organizations. That's all I had, and that's all I knew.
Yeah, a relatively small community, but at least you may not get along with everybody.
Right, exactly.
But you're playing with these kids, you're growing up,
Right.
et cetera, you know?
Exactly.
And so part of, I think that's one of the things that people don't get about here. I mean, I myself, before I came to Eugene, I'd never not lived in an intact black community, ever. And so there's a certain not only comfort, but even if you move on up and you move to across in my case La Cienega, where there's less of us,
Right.
but there's still black people and it's normal, and nobody turns their head when to watch you, and nobody hangs your family in effigy. None of that kind of stuff goes on. So you come here, and where's the hood?
Right.
And don't say Whitaker, because no,
That's
that
not it.
ain't so, right? So what happened here? Why is that not present? So in terms of the history, when you find out, oh, well, wherever the hood started to form, wherever, for example, because Willie Mims talks about, look, and your aunt talked about, wherever there was like 10 black families gathered in Eugene, there was always something to break up that community. So whether it was Tent City, they bulldoze that to make the bridge. Boom. Then they do urban renewal. So there'd be like 10 families living around High Street, and boom, they make the Campbell Center. Or boom, they make the Federal Building. When there's like, every time there's a pattern. So now pushing people out to Glenwood, pushing people out to West 11th, and then all of a sudden now, wow, everybody's scattered. There's no hood, so to speak.
Right.
So what happens when you do that? You can organize civil rights struggle. I mean, that's one of the pieces. Thankfully they didn't bomb your church, but crosses were burned in front of the tents, not the Negro Settlement. That is one of the stories. The lights, in the night, and you call the cops, and well, how do you know that it isn't the cops? Because the Klan lists indicate that it was the cops too. So you can't call the cops on the Klan if the cops are part of the Klan.
Right. Right.
And still maybe in some cases, but let's not go there.
Right.
But so you move to Olympia, and there's different ethnic neighborhoods, and so there's a sense of security. It's different. So there are some new skills that you have to learn, but all in all, nobody's trying to get rid of you.
Exactly. Exactly. The other thing I found being in a bigger city is that sometimes I felt a little bit, and not in all cases, a little bit of reverse discrimination.
How so?
Education, the way you speak, your speech betrayed you, and so some people,
educated speech, you mean?
Educated speech, and so some people look at you a little different. The things that you can acquire, the type of job that you've had, and so I've experienced with some of my own folks especially when I was up in Washington, that I got to know a little bit better, and some that I didn't, just because of you trying to do a little better.
Yes.
They look at you a lot differently, or I didn't fit. Talk to me for a minute, and then you didn't get to talk to them, but it was always the speech, or they thought you were trying to be...
you're sounding white, or you're trying to be better than
us. I've had that said quite a few times, and I've even had that said from people that I've done business with, that they thought that I was white until they came into the office. That has happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
I'm glad I'm not the only one that happens
Well,
to.
no, and it's
You don't look the way you sound over the phone.
and I've heard, and it's happened so much, and that's at first I was a little offended because I didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But you get used to it, and sometimes I use it to my benefit, and I do the job that needs to be done, and I'll do it better than what they expect.
Yeah.
And
Because let's be blunt, their expectations are low. You know.
Exactly.
Your phone voice, shall we say? You know. I mean, as I've said before, even on this program, it's like when somebody said that to me, making an appointment. Oh well, you know, I'm paid to sound white, but my voice is black of the roots. You know, and you know, so humor kind of diffuses that, right?
And I use that a lot.
And they don't expect you to be competent.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there is that. I mean, and I'm sure you would encounter that in your business. It's like,
Sure.
wait, you're trained. You know, you're offering products. It's not you personally. It's not the Bank of Quentin. It's the Bank of State Farm.
Exactly.
Right? So,
And you get that in some of the conversations, and I have a tendency over time to roll with it and continue to do what I'm trained to do, and make sure that it's done the way that they need to have it done, and make them feel important. That's what's important to me, because I have a job to do still, and so I do it the best that I can do it for the clients that I do have and the clients that are going to come. And then, you know, if they're happy, they'll stay. If they're not, depending on for whatever reason, sometimes you don't find out the real reason.
right.
You got to let it go. I used to hang on to it because I always thought it was me, but you let it go.
Phone call. Go ahead. Pipe it in. Hello?
Hello. This is,
This Mrs. Reynolds?
yes, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment.
Okay.
My grandson did a beautiful job, but it's so much that had went on before they come into the picture. Now, it was only 2 black families that had homes here in the 40s. And it was about 7 blacks here when my family came. So it was just a very few of us.
What was that like?
And we could not buy homes.
No.
We was forced to move out on West 11 because we couldn't find nowhere else. And out there, the people was glad to get rid of it because when it rained, the Amazon overflowed.
Yeah.
And they would have to come in and move them out. So they was glad to get rid of it. So they let us move out there. It was 2 families that had homes in Eugene, the Mims and Washingtons.
Okay, right.
Mr. and Mrs. Leo Washington. They both bought them a home. So it was only those 2 that had homes in the 1940s and 43s. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Wow, that was great.
Yeah, I mean, in that census, so, right, it jumps from 5 to 55.
Wow.
You know, and that jump happened in the 40s, where, you know, people either work for the railroad, you know, come down from Portland or whatever, and they couldn't, you know, they're working people.
Right.
And, you know, we're American citizens. So, I mean, the irony for me is like, okay, we go fight in the war, and a black veteran could not even buy a house in the country that you fought for.
Right.
You know, in the city limits. I mean, that's, you know, that's deep.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm glad that she called in.
Yeah.
That was
good.
great.
That was good.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that my father will call in and give a little more information. So, Bob, if you're out there listening, it'd be nice if you would chime in and give us a little bit of history, because you have some important things to say. It really helps.
The story has to be told
It has to be
because, you know, I mean, and not just during Black History Month, but year round, you know.
Right.
I was fortunate, and I'm glad, you know, that you were able to make it on, and, you know, that we also had the phone working, you know,
Oh, that was perfect.
to have that come in.
You know, when, you know, so the ironies of living in this town, right? So here we are, you know, the so-called settlement where, you know, after your grandfather, I think, did this come before he died? Did they honor him before he died? I mean, honor, so to speak, because the family wanted the name spelled out.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And you expected to see the name spelled out.
Right.
And someone in the sign shop in the city did this, made it initial. And it took 24 years to change it to its full length.
Wow.
After them giving a bunch of excuses. So we have another phone call. Go ahead, caller.
Yes, say, this is Robert Reynolds,
Hey.
Quentin's father, and I would like to comment on this. For my first thing is there was no such thing as tent city. Now, the church was half lumber and half canvas. That was it.
Okay.
The other homes were lumber.
Okay.
No tents, no tents, no tents. And second thing is the city of Eugene come into agreement with the black settlement across the Ferry Street Bridge to swap the property we had there for the property out on 11th Street, because we was there before they built the dams on the Willamette. And every winter, we would get washed out. So they swapped this property from across the bridge out on 11th Street. And come to find out, 11th Street was worse than the Ferry Street Bridge. But up until then, you about knew where you stood in the city. Like my son was saying, I didn't know I was black really until I went in the military. The only black people I associated with here in Eugene was my family.
Yeah.
My brothers and sisters. I went to school with them. I socialized with them, and I never had too much encounter other than school with the white population. But you knew where to go and who to deal with. Snappy Service number 1 was the only cafe in Eugene that we could patronize.
Where was that?
Right down by the train depot.
The Chinese restaurant or the Jackalope Inn now?
Well, I don't know what it is now, but the building is still there.
Yeah.
And they had a Snappy number 2 on 8th and Willamette.
Okay.
That you could not patronize. You could not go in the Snappy number 2, but you could go in the Snappy number 1. And it was. I remember the trolley tracks down Willamette Street and all out, and it was a hard place to come up in. I glad that I did come up in, because I left here, went to the South in the military. And like my son was saying, it really opened my eyes to the difference of the pigment of my skin and the pigment of my white friend's skin that really set me off. It was rough, and it's still rough.
Yeah.
There's lots done, but there's lots to be done, too. And that is my comment. But no tent city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I'm basically following the conventions. People have said no tent city. That's not what we call it, and other people say, "Well, it was tent." Okay, I don't know. I wasn't here. I'm just following what people have told me. So.
But the thing I like about what you're doing is that this is the dialogue that we needed.
Yeah.
And this is what opens so that the grandchildren and generations after will have a real story, so that we can tell the real dynamics.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, and not in this broadcast, but we talked before that, we need to get this story down pat.
Yes.
We don't want to keep recreating the story because it seems like it gets diluted over time. We need to get it written down so that the history can be told correctly.
Yeah.
So that, you know, while my grandmother, she's doing well, we need to get that story.
Right.
And put it on tape. That's why I see why you push it so much, and we haven't did it
Sorry
enough.
to be insistent about that, but
Well, I'm
there
not
you go.
sorry anymore, but
Yeah.
this opened my eyes.
Yeah.
I'm so happy I did this.
I mean, even when what your father just said, that's deep. The city offered a land swap. Wait a minute. From one piece of land to another piece of land that floods worse.
Yes.
And they know
Wetlands.
that.
Uh-huh.
I know they know that up front. Not a house,
No.
if you can afford it. And wait a minute, your family could afford it.
Yes.
Right? And not the only ones that could afford it. So, okay, not houses in the city limits, but a land swap.
Exactly.
So that's got the Klan written all over it, in my opinion. But you know.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. If I can make a little comment on that, I was just reading a little bit about my grandfather, who's deceased, and when he had his businesses and he was doing business, and he was so proud to be an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and he was able to hire Caucasians or white people.
What's our time, Dean? Because they say there's another phone call.
Oh,
5
go
minutes?
ahead and
Okay,
take the-
go ahead.
Go ahead. And he was able to hire people, but in the long run, so that we can get to that phone call, that he was, depending on his accountant or one of his partners, lost his business, and he
Divorce,
lost
I
everything.
think it was. His
Yeah.
partner got divorced or something
Exactly,
like that. Yeah.
and money went elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that was the sad thing about it. And I'll just wrap this up so we can get that caller. But his dignity stayed the same.
Yeah.
He wasn't really, even though he may have got angry, I didn't see it. He always told me how to do things the right way.
Yeah.
I'd have to sit down. So.
Yeah. Phone call. Caller, go ahead, caller.
Hello, this
Hi.
is Dolores Wilson.
Hi.
Hi. I wanted to make a comment. I'm one of those prodigies of West 11th.
Mm-hmm.
And that was me and my brother carrying the water can.
Ah, okay.
Wow.
One thing about growing up in Eugene and being African American is that when you went to school, the only time you really knew that you were different is when they started talking about slavery.
Yes.
And since you're the only black child in the class,
Right.
quite naturally they looked
All
at
eyes
you.
on you.
Yes. And but one thing about West 11th is that we were all a family out there. You know, that old saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
That was our village.
Yes.
There and Glenwood. And it was hard, but yet and still we had a good time because we had each other. I'm from a large family.
Yes.
So we didn't see all the bitterness because our parents never taught us to be anything different than what we were.
Right.
And they always taught us that you are somebody. You know, my daddy always told us a good name is better than all the money you can get.
Isn't
Right.
that
So
true?
It's powerful.
that was one of the things that he always instilled in us, is that we always have a good name. So, and he was a magnificent man, and he was honored before he died with the street. So he got to see that. And that's all. Oh, wait, no, my brother Sam was an advocate of the civil rights.
Yes.
He
Right.
even went to Mississippi to help with the voting down there. So he knew Stokely Carmichael and different folks. But he and Willie C. helped start our credit union.
Oh, you are? Yes.
Yes, they did.
Willie C.
my
Mims.
goodness.
Yes.
Yes. And we had a black boutique. That was one of the first black businesses here. So
Wow.
Okay.
it was, like I said, it was some good times and then there were some bad times. But all the bad times, we had each other. So that was it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Time tick? Yeah, Roger. Okay. Final thoughts? 2 minutes goes fast on
Okay,
television.
well, I'll just hurry up.
You don't have to. but-
Okay, I enjoyed myself, and as I get older and as you mature, And as you see more things, you have a tendency to want to do better.
Yeah.
Legacies, I think about my character, the way that I represent my family and represent the Reynolds, the history. I want to do it in a way that they'll be proud and that my kids can see me and that they'll be proud of me. I'm not perfect, but I'm going to strive to do even better. And this forum right here just made me realize that there's a lot that needs to be done, and we need to quit sitting around and not doing it, but we need to be a part, and not just of the community, but of our own selves, our own people. We need to do more together, and we need to come together, and we need to unite to do what is right for all of humankind or mankind, not just for Afro-Americans, but Hispanic, Asians, whites. There's a better way to do things, and I want to have success with all and not just our own.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good. Thank you. I want to give a shout out to my partner Sherry, who basically actually is responsible for uncovering a lot of this stuff. You know, I get to be the talking head, but you know, she's the one that sat long hours in the library finding those pictures and Wiley Griffin and talking with LTD, and you know, said, okay, we got to change the street name. So, all right, this has been DiversiTV. Tune in next week for a youth perspective. Email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu and send us feedback.